The Bismarck class started life in the early 1930s, when Germany was looking to reach beyond the limits of the Versailles Treaty and start to build ships on a par with those in other major navies of the world. This meant a design limited by the Washington Naval Treaty, with the first draft using the maximum 35,000-ton displacement to give a fast battleship capable of 30 knots and armed with 8 guns of 13-inch caliber. The armour protection would be extensive to compensate for the smaller size of the guns, but at the time it was not too much of a sacrifice, as the main projected enemy, the French, did not have anything with heavier guns on the drawing board at the time. However, after having signed the Anglo-German Naval Agreement and realised France was expanding its navy to include battleships with 15-inch guns, the design was revised to match these weapons. But Germany had a problem. Thanks to the Versailles Treaty, their ship designers had little experience in the arts of modern battleship construction. The previous Scharnhorst class had built quite extensively on the last iterations of design for German battle cruisers from World War I. For the Bismarcks, they could take some principles from the Bayern and L-20 designs, but they'd also have to do a lot of clean sheet design work. Due to these factors, the designers wanted a fast, long-range and stable gun platform, but they just couldn't come up with a way of working the design that kept within the treaty limits. Combined with Hitler's increasing disregard for international agreements, the design grew and grew until they would end up displacing almost 50,000 tons at full load. This was far in excess of the treaty limits and showed some of the weaknesses in the Germans' design bureau, as for this weight they got a fast battleship that was armed with 4 twin turrets, a pair super-firing forward and a pair super-firing aft. These were armed with modern 15-inch guns and accompanied 6 twin turrets containing 5.9-inch guns for a secondary anti-surface battery, with an anti-aircraft battery of 16 4.1-inch guns, 16 37mm guns and 12 20mm guns. The armour belt was 12.6 inches thick, with a low-mounted armoured deck that limited the ship's best protected space and would work well at close range, but would be more vulnerable to longer-range fire. This would leave the ship vulnerable to flooding above the armoured deck in the event that the main belt was penetrated, and meant that fire control system cables, some of which weren't actually protected, had longer to go before they could reach the safety of the armoured deck. Whilst they were the largest battleships in the world until the end of 1941, they weren't actually the most powerful. HMS Hood was 4,000 tons lighter. On a good day it could be slightly faster. The main belt offered slightly more protection, whilst carrying a similar number and caliber of guns for its main battery, albeit she was unmodernised. The Nagato, North Carolina, South Dakota and Nelson-class battleships had all been built to treaty specifications, and were all over 5,000 tons lighter at full load, even after refits. Each of these classes was better armed, carrying 8 or 9 16-inch guns, with the exception of the North Carolina class. They were much better armoured, and with the exception of the Nelson class, almost as fast in normal sea conditions. 2 of these designs were almost 20 years old. The Iowa class, which was then under construction, displaced around the same amount as the Bismarck at full load, but was faster, better armed, and better protected. This shows that, whilst powerful, the Bismarck design was fairly inefficient in its use of the available displacement and still contained a number of weaknesses. These are best illustrated in the ship's careers, both of which span a few years of the Second World War. Bismarck herself planned to raid the Atlantic alongside the Tirpitz and the 2 Scharnhorst class, but between delays in construction and damage from British attacks, the other 3 ships were not ready in time and it had to sail with the heavy cruiser Prince Eugen instead. This reduced force met HMS Hood and Prince of Wales in the Denmark Strait, where excellent German gunnery destroyed the Hood and damaged Prince of Wales in short order. However, the shock of her own guns firing disabled Bismarck's main ranging radar set, reducing the ship's accuracy unless it could be fixed. Further, a 14-inch shell from Prince of Wales defeated the armour protection and put a hole in the ship that breached a fuel tank and knocked out a generator and boiler room. Faced with reduced speed, fuel and flooding, the mission was called off and the ship headed for home. Under torpedo attack, the anti-torpedo defences held up quite well, protecting the ship from major damage until one managed to disable a rudder, leaving the ship unable to run away. Now the ship had to face HMS King George V alongside the older HMS Rodney. Although initially Bismarck's gunnery looked good, the ship's various design weaknesses came into play as Rodney's 16-inch shells wiped out the bridge and the primary fire control system with a single hit, leaving the turrets operating under secondary fire control and then under local control, as the secondary systems were also destroyed, as well as completely wiping out the super-firing Bruno turret with another shot. Once shell fire had destroyed the aft secondary fire control position, the ship's armament was effectively out of action. Ironically, because the British took the chance to close in for the kill to improve their accuracy, they actually made the job harder for themselves. Whilst Rodney had effectively destroyed Bismarck as a fighting unit at long range, due to the ship being designed for close-range combat, the subsequent hail of fire failed to do much more than rearrange the existing wreckage before the ship eventually sank. Although survivors' accounts indicate a fire in at least one of the ship's secondary magazines, as well as leaks in one of the machinery spaces before the order to scuttle and evacuate was given. Unfortunately, although Tirpitz was completed to a modified design that addressed some of the weaknesses, she would never see action against another capital ship. After being moved to Norway, she was instead subjected to increasing air raids and attacks by midget submarines until eventually Royal Air Force Lancasters hit her with 12,000-pound supersonic toolboy bombs, something no battleship was ever designed to take, and she was sunk in the fjord she was sheltering in.
That's it for this video. Thanks for watching. If you have a comment or suggestion for a ship to review, let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to comment on the pinned post for dry dock questions.